Hello and welcome to the first session on building a graphical user interface, or GUI, with Tkinter. I have found Tkinter to be a wonderful module for building kind of prototypes of graphical user interfaces or even experiments. We're accessing Tkinter through Python, more specifically Python 3. And so if you're not familiar with Python, or what an IDE is, there are some other great videos I'll try to link down in the description for you to access. But Python is going to be a programming language that we are using to build this graphical user interface, accessing this Tkinter module. And so if you haven't already downloaded Python 3 or an IDE, I'd suggest you pause this video and go download those. And when you're looking for an IDE, there are a lot of different options. And so an IDE is just going to be essentially this environment where I am writing the actual code. So the nice thing is it's going to organize everything for you. It's also going to color code. In a lot of IDEs, it's going to color code for you. It's also going to kind of auto-populate for you. And so, for example, if I write this statement for I in range 5 prints hello world, you can see how it's color coded these different things. It gives you an idea as to what it is interpreting your code as meaning. That's all beyond the purpose of today's explanation, but to give you an idea of what you may want to be looking for. And so I'm using Visual Studio Code. I've used PyCharm in the past. Both of them are great environments. I've run into some issues with PyCharm of late. I don't know if it's just compatibility issues, so I've switched over to Visual Studio Code. But again, if you are not familiar with Python or not familiar with IDEs, why don't you go ahead and pause this video, go download an IDE, go download Python 3, and then come back and we will get started. So today we're going to be using a module called Tkinter, spelled just like that, T-K-I-N-T-E-R. And Tkinter itself, like I said, is going to be kind of this really neat, easy to learn, easy to use module for creating these graphical user interfaces. So to get started, we're going to need to do a couple things. First, we're going to need to import Tkinter. And so what this is doing is telling Python that, or this IDE, that we want to be using this module Tkinter. So it's going to go out, it's going to access all the dependencies, everything the computer needs to have in order to run what we're going to be running. Now, the other nice thing is you can import Tkinter with a nickname. And so I like to import Tkinter, and kind of the standard is importing Tkinter as TK. That means it's just easier such that in the future, I don't have to write Tkinter every time I want to call something. I can just write TK, and that means the exact same thing in this Python language, so to speak. So next, we're going to need to add two things before we can actually start drawing anything on our GUI. First, we're going to need to establish the root, or that root window. And so to do so, I write root. You can do whatever you want into here. You could write window, you could write, your name, whatever. But I like to use root just because that's kind of the standard. It's what I've always used. It makes it easy to remember. You want to pick something that's going to be easy to remember when you need to call it later. So we write root equals TK. So again, we're accessing Tkinter dot capital T, lowercase k, parentheses. Below that, we're going to add root again, and now we're going to add our main loop. And so this is just telling Python to run what's in here for Tkinter. So to get started, we're going to write some really simple text on the screen. So let's call this our welcome text. And so with Tkinter, we'll say welcome, and this is going to name the actual text, the actual label. We're going to then call Tkinter, and then we're going to access label. Within the parentheses, we're going to now dictate what we want that label to say. And so let's say, hello world. Now, ignore what I'm putting on the end here. We'll talk about it in just a second, but let's go ahead and run this code. And you can see up top, it pops up a very little window that we can actually resize, move around, and it says hello world at the very top. Awesome. Now, one of the things you may be unsatisfied with is that's a really small window and it's kind of cumbersome to then resize it to make it more pleasant to look at. And so one of the things we can do is actually set the window size before we draw. So to do so, we're going to type in root, again, accessing what we wrote up there. And we're going to say geometry. And then within the parentheses and quotation marks, we're going to be putting our width by our height. And this is going to be measured in pixels. So let's just say 500 pixels by 500 pixels. And now what this is going to do is make that window 500 pixels big in both directions. And there we go. You can see hello world up here at the top again, and it gives us a good size window to play with. Now, I said to ignore what I put on here at the end. However, this is going to be one of the reasons I like Tkinter the best, at least for beginners, because it allows you some flexibility. So let's say I want to just throw things up there. As they come up, everything subsequently just gets layered on top. And so let's say welcome to equals TK label, text, and we'll call it, and we'll say also hello world. And then we're going to pack that in there as well. Let's go ahead and run this. And you can see that it comes up hello world, and right below it, it says also hello world. And so what this pack component is doing is saying, essentially, let's start at the top. Let's write whatever we're told to write here. In this case, it's going to be a label that says hello world. Put it there, pack, great. Next thing, welcome to. Okay, another label. This one says also hello world. And so it's just going to stack right on top. Before we move on to some of the other ways you can actually put these in specific positions, I don't like, even though you can put pack at the end, or you can put the positional locator there at the end, one thing I like to do is just come down a line and then put it below. I think it reads easier this way. It prevents the line. As you'll see, we can add in these parentheses some other qualifiers that are going to give us a little bit more power. And it keeps it a little bit cleaner in my mind rather than having it kind of trail all the way off there. And so if we type in welcome pack down there, we type in welcome to pack down here, same thing pops up, hello world, also hello world. So let's say we don't necessarily want it at the top middle, but we actually want it at the middle, right? We want it in the middle of the screen. We don't just want it in the top middle packed in the way it is. Instead of pack, we can use what's known as place, if I can actually type here. And the reason I like place is it allows you to put a relative position on the X and Y coordinates to essentially, maneuver all these different components that we are drawing on our root window wherever we want them. And so to get the relative X and relative Y positions for that, you're going to type in rel X equals, it'll do rel Y equals. And so each of these are going to range from 0 to 1. On the x-axis, 0 will be on the left-hand side, 1 will be on the right-hand side. For the y-axis, 0 will be up top, and y will be down below. And so let's say we want to actually put this in the actual center of our screen. So we type in rel x equals 0.5, rel y equals 0.5. So this should give us right in the center of the screen. And it does. It gives us in the center screen. And again, you can notice as we move this around, this doesn't affect the position, and it wouldn't with the pack either. But you can notice, and it's maybe a little bit more noticeable if we shrink this down, that it's actually what appears to be off center. And the reason it does that is because it's using the first letter to actually center its position in the window. Well, that's not great because now you're having to think about, okay, what's the width of this? How do I subtract the width of that to get at the actual center? Well, Tkinter makes it even easier for you to get around that. And so let's say we actually wanted it truly in the center. What we're going to write is anchor equals center in here. So now if we run this, you can see that it is actually in the center and it stays in the center regardless of how I move this window around, right? Right there in the smack dab center. Makes it easy peasy. So let's say now we don't want to just have text, but we want to have a button, right? Because we want to welcome somebody to our application, but we also want to kind of move on to a next screen, right? Or have the app do something other than welcome people. So to do so, we're going to put a button on screen. And so we'll call this the next button. We'll type in TK, and now instead of label, we're going to type in button. Within the parentheses, just like with the label, we will type in text, and then what we want our button to say. And this is going to be the actual text that is displayed on the button. And so let's say we just want it to say next. And now let's place it perhaps under the text. And so let's say next button dot place. We'll do rel X is still going to be center. Rel Y, let's say, is going to be 0.6. And let's anchor it in the center again. And so now we should have the welcome text come up right in the center of the screen and a next button pop up right below it. And there you go. You can see, again, that relative position. You can see the distance between the welcome and the next is going to change as you resize that window, but their relative positions in the window do not change. And you can notice nothing happens when I click this next. And we'll go over in future lessons about how to actually call a function while clicking this button to get the app to do other things. But you get to see some of that functionality. And so again, let's say we don't like our hello world right in the center. Let's say we want it about a quarter of the way down. Let's keep our relative X and our relative Y. We'll move 2.25. So now we've got hello world up in the top quarter, and we have our next button still down there. And so you can play around with this. You know, the nice thing about Tkinter is it's got a lot of options we're going to play through with, right? And so just to give you an example, if you type in that TK, for the Tkinter, you're going to see things like that label, like we talked about before. You'll have a check button we can add, the button. And so play around with these. You can really start getting a good idea. You can add an image of what we'll be able to actually do with Tkinter as a tool in our toolbox. You're not going to hurt anything, so go out there, try to create your own application. If you have questions, let me know. Next time, we're going to cover adding a function, having this button actually call that function to do something, and then we will move on to doing more complex things like accessing information from the internet, right? So now I can then push that next button, and it pulls internet from, let's say, a weather API, right? And so it gives me the weather for where I am, and it can read that out to me. So again, if you have any comments, questions, type them in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.